Hi everyone. In this video, I'm going to be talking about ADHD and kind of the whole disorder from symptoms, statistics, all the way to treatment and therapy. So let's get started. First, let's talk about stats, right? So stats are really important to understand the prevalence and why we're focusing so much on the disorder. And it's pretty interesting, right? Because in 2014, 11% of American parents with children aged 4 to 17 have received a ADHD diagnosis for their son or daughter, right? So that shows you that in America, like a huge percentage of families are getting diagnosed with ADHD. So it affects a large population. And of these diagnosed families, 30% continues into adulthood. So that means that when you have it in childhood, there's a lot of support, especially because they're children and they're automatically very supported, right? But and with children, you tend to be a little bit more accommodative, but as you go into adulthood, more expectations with less support makes life more difficult for them, right? And it's just very important that we're aware that there's such a large population, especially because ADHD is the large chance that you know somebody with ADHD and that somehow or another you've made their life a little bit more difficult because you just don't know like it exists. So all this is to say that ADHD, understanding the prevalence of it will help you understand why it's so important to focus on the disease and the disorder and why it's so important that we think about and we're so conscious about it. So first, let's go into the symptoms of ADHD. What does ADHD even stand for? Stands for attention deficit hyperactive disorder. So you can see where the acronym comes from. And this acronym is pretty interesting because it makes every portion of the disorder well elucidated, right? So what ADHD is defined by is basically inattentiveness and hyperactivity. So inattentive, not being able to pay attention for long periods of time, as well as hyper. Now, there is a difference between ADHD and just regular toddlers. We all know that toddlers have the tendency to be very inattentive, very hyper, get the zoomies sometimes, but that's not the same thing as ADHD, right? So the reason for that is because this inattentive and hyperness lasts longer and is prevalent in a lot more situations, right? So let's write that down. These are longer and present in all circumstances or a variety of circumstances. So, what do we mean by that, right? So, basically, when you are presenting with ADHD, or when you encounter a person who's presenting with ADHD, you're going to see this manifest in different ways. So, you're going to see it manifest as difficulty maintaining strong bonds, bonds. You're also going to see it in terms of academic behavior. So academics, their grades can start to slip because they're not able to focus for longer periods, and that they just will forget to do a lot of things. So, for example, this is especially noticeable in something known as executive function. We talked about this in um, chapter one. So, executive function is defined as do tasks such as planning, personality, memory, so on and so forth. So children with ADHD will have will have some difficulty with executive functions, especially multi-step directions. So this can be in a school setting, for example, they might not be able to, what if a teacher gives you an assignment, so like first color this picture, cut it out, and then make it into a puppet, they're gonna have difficulty following through every step of that. And this can also manifest in home settings, right? So you can tell them, okay, first go clean off the dinner table, then go set up the dishes, and then set out the plates and forks. They're going to have a lot of difficulty in both school and home settings, which is basically showing that variety of circumstances that we talked about, right? So, in addition, they're going to have some difficulty finishing what they started. They may also have some difficulty remembering what to bring back to school, so memory, so remembering what to bring. So now let's talk about kind of the diagnostic procedure, right? So ADHD can be very easily misdiagnosed. So there's not an objective diagnostic test. No objective diagnostic test. I'm gonna cross that out in red, so that's really obvious. And why is this a problem, right? This means that it's very subjective and easy to misdiagnose, right? So since problems with like attention, hyperactivity, they're not necessarily just caused by ADHD. There can be other underlying conditions that can be missed because of the ADHD diagnosis. So, for example, depression, sleeping issues, and learning disorders are all potential reasons that can present the same symptoms of ADHD, but that's not ADHD actually isn't the root cause. So you have to rule out as many as possible, as many disorders as possible to come to a confirmed diagnosis, right? So these symptoms that we're talking about need to be severe enough to interfere with everyday activities, right? So severe enough to interfere with day-to-day activities. In addition, um, it should be present in all settings. That's what we talked about. And ADHD, for some reason, seems to run in families. Um, it seems to run in families. There's no genetics or biomarkers that are actually indicative of this. Not running. And like autism, there's no actual patterns that they see, like for example, increased brain matter, there's nothing like that. Um, what researchers have found is that people with ADHD might have some differences in the way that the brain cells are structured and how the brains remodel themselves to any activity or any new circumstances. So differences in remodeling. So let's compare this to autism, right? Autism, on the other hand, was the main difference with autism was actually s- networks. So, in other words, there were some differences in how information was processed. Here, there's kind of a difference in how it responds after processing. So, that's the main difference, which helped me kind of differentiate autism from ADHD. Um, Finally, there has been some biological um, identification that a lot of people with ADHD tend to have lower dopamine levels. Um, so tend to have lower dopamine. So it's not, so this is important because dopamine is involved in reward pathways. So in learning new behaviors, rewarding new behaviors, maybe that can help explain a little bit the symptoms of ADHD. So there actually aren't, it isn't a cure again for ADHD, no cure, but there are some medications that treat the symptoms. Remember, that is also what happened with autism as well. There was no cure, but there were some symptomatic medications that really helped to um, that helped to treat the symptoms associated with ADHD. I'll switch to black because medication is pretty important. Um, There are some stimulants, right? So methylphenidate, um, methyl, let me make sure I'm spelling that right. methylphenidate. Okay, methylphenidate. So methylphenidates are basically some stimulants, and they this drug is mostly used to help treat to manage the symptoms of ADHD, not actually cure it. There's not an actual cure for ADHD. So, in addition, there are drugs that act for the whole day, versus taking it from hour to hour because children can't be, it's very distracting for them to go and take breaks and to kind of do it over and over again. So they just have long-acting drugs as well. And drugs dosages for people with ADHD is an experiment. And this is actually goes for any drug with any disorder because there are a multitude of factors such as metabolism rate, the the child's needs, the child's symptoms, and the child's environment, which may, so what I mean by environment is their demands. If they're a school, a kindergartner, you'd likely want to have a different dosage than if they were high schoolers. Their tolerance is different, and all of these things are very important to determining how much and when you need to give the medication. So that's all to say that there is no standardized dosage. It's really dependent on the person, and this goes for every medication. So that was everything you need to know about ADHD. Next video is going to be on Down syndrome, which is a very interesting disorder as well, which stems from a trisomy. So I want you guys to research that a little bit before the next video is posted. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Bye, everyone.